Good afternoon, everyone, or early good evening, depending on where you are. What a pleasure it is to be sitting here talking to Kate Carlisle and her new book for Brooklyn Wainwright, Little Black Book. And one of the cool things about, well, and I should mention that Kate very kindly autographed copies for us, but they're gone. So we
Oh,
sold them out. Yep.
right.
I am holding in my hand the last autographed copy, which actually may belong to somebody who's waiting for me to return it to the bookstore. So sorry about that. Sometimes when we do these, we take our best guess based on previous demand and so forth about what to ask the author to do for us, and occasionally we're short. But in this case, we're right on the dot. So hooray. Anyway, it shouldn't deter you from getting a copy of this wonderful book. And one of the pleasures of it is to be talking about Rebecca, the 1938 novel by Daphne du Maurier, which has never been out of print and which I think is an absolute classic. So, Kate, you wrote this book during the pandemic, and in your afterword, you mentioned that you weren't entirely sure that you were going to get through writing a book in the pandemic. Did you choose Rebecca because it's kind of gothicy and slightly has a slightly supernatural element to it? It's gothic fantasy, it's often described as, although I think it's perfectly good romantic suspense.
Yeah, I chose this book before the pandemic hit.
Aha.
So the main connection with the book is that the two women, Brooklyn has a friend that shows up on their doorstep, and Claire and she became friends a few years before on a show like similar to Antiques Roadshow. So Brooklyn was the book expert, and Claire, this woman, was the uh, antique weapons expert. But they bonded over Gothic novels. And so Claire is just a nut for Gothic novels. And in fact, when things happen along the way, because this is sort of an adventure, she sees Gothic snippets of books, and one of the snippets is when Maxim de Winter goes out in the boat with Rebecca, and I'll say no more. But anyway, that's it's a little spoiler. But the thing I loved about writing this book in the pandemic, which I didn't love a whole lot, there were lots of horrible things going on, but the thing I loved the most is that I traveled in this book. I went back to Scotland, went to Loch Ness, went to Inverness, and went to Sonoma, and which is where she was raised, where Brooklyn was raised. And Rebecca, the book is kind of the catalyst for everything that happens. There's not a lot about the book itself in the story, I mean, of Rebecca in my story. So
No, there's not. I mean, Rebecca is the book that arrives in the post, not for Brooklyn Wainwright book restorer, but rather for her husband, the former MI6 guy who, it's a somewhat improbable scenario, but nonetheless fun, who is married now to Brooklyn and, but maintains his old contacts. And the book arrives from Scotland
mm-hmm.
and a break-in follows. So we can tell things are going to happen here.
Right.
But let's go back and talk about Gothic, because this is a term that's being thrown around left and right lately. I said 2 years ago that Gothic was going to be the next big thing. And J.T. Ellison and Jane Ann Krentz and I have done at least two discussions about, what the Gothic novel is. And it can be interpreted so many ways. So when you say Gothic, what is it you're thinking of that makes a book fall into that genre?
Um, what I think of with Gothic is there's a touch of horror, a touch of romance. It's very suspenseful. It's usually a young woman in jeopardy of some kind, either from her husband or the man of the house, or however it turns out. And I've always seen them as very romantic because the man of the house, or the new husband, as in Rebecca's case, not Rebecca, but the story, it's like they're either going to fall in love or he's going to kill her. And I love that kind of suspense. I just like the dark, wonderful, romantic-y flavors of all the Gothic novels that I've read.
Well, there certainly is a romantic touch to them, but there's also a creepy. Horror in some cases I think is too strong, but there is a creepiness or tinge of the unexplained anyway that often accompanies a Gothic. And generally, a Gothic is not confined, but generally there's a structure, like an Agatha Christie book, and often Gothic I think is now confused with the country house murder design. But many of Gothics, like the Castle of Otranto, for example, which is a very early example, take place in some sort of a creepy house. All of the House of Usher is a Gothic, the Castle of Otranto is a Gothic. Rebecca is the Gothic because Manderley is really, in many ways, the major character. And then we have the spooky, creepy housekeeper, Mrs. Danvers. And we have the unexplained death. And we have the newlywed woman who is naive and possibly in danger. And we don't know whether her husband, what his role is. But it's being subdivided. I mean, we just ran across, JT and I were talking about it the other day. We just ran across an eco Gothic, for example. I know. There's a Western Gothic that has just come out. And so I'm not sure what Gothic actually means anymore. I mean, I think reviewers are kind of throwing it around in a way that is just becoming a commonplace, but it doesn't really mean anything. So I guess the question for you is, could you have a Gothic cozy? Are cozy and Gothic, are they antithetical, or can you actually write a Gothic cozy?
Well, I have a castle there. It's not really Gothic. I mean, the story isn't Gothic, but there are sort of I guess you could. I know there's another author out there who just she's also writing something akin to a Gothic, but her books are about a writer who goes to an American writer who goes to England because she writes Gothic novels and she has, writer's block or something. So she decides to go to England and kind of get her mojo back. I don't think they're Gothic, but I guess you could write a cozy Gothic if it was edgy, cozy.
Well, there has to be menace in it. There's no question that, it can't be cute. I mean, it really does have a Gothic, really does have to have, I think, a certain darkness and a certain sense of menace. And you're right. One of the big questions is, is somebody going to be killed? Oftentimes a romantic partner. I mean, I don't know if you're a fan of Mary Stuart, but I absolutely loved her books. And, I think of them as romantic suspense, but maybe Nine Coaches Waiting is really a Gothic, because you've got the chateau and you've got the guy, and you don't know whether he's a lover or a killer or possibly both. And, you've got the naive young woman who shows up, well, not so naive, but anyway, she shows up to be, I think it's the governess. I haven't read it for a long time.
Yeah.
But the whole dynamic in a Mary Stuart book is there are always two guys. And you don't know till the end which one is going to prove to be the trustworthy one and which one is going to prove the villain. And the heroine's always trying to navigate her way through the story, so it's a trust no one in many respects. But at the same time, I think there are, in some of them more than others, there's a Gothic element to them because of the setting, as I said, like Nine Coaches Waiting, or what's her first book, The Mistress of Mellon. I think Mellon is one of those. Isn't that like one of those grand English country houses where you can, yeah. And Victoria Holt wrote a whole. I love that kind of book. I mean, God, I read them all. And I think Victoria Holt wrote, in her way, a Gothic also. They were mostly Victorian, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. I think they're mostly Victorian, and there's the young woman who's doesn't know who to trust. Basically, that's
So do you think you can have a Gothic? I'd have to go all the way back and reread The Castle of Otranto, which I haven't probably read since I was 16. Was that a guy? I'm trying to remember, but I mean, can you have a Gothic with a man in that position? Does it have to be a woman?
well, traditionally it's a woman because we're so frail and easily
Lacking
led.
agency in the modern terminology, right? Yeah, but
Right.
I'm not sure that you can't have one. If you have a young and kind of naive man,
Hmm.
I'm not at all sure you can't have a Gothic where he could be equally in jeopardy and you could have evil women.
I like that. I,
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that it demands. I mean, of course, this is a question I have hotly debated too, is whether
mhm.
you can write a cozy with a male protagonist. Does it always have to have a woman with some very cool job and some boyfriend for backup? Or in fact, can you have a cozy written by a guy? I have an author named David Wagner who writes books set in Italy with a protagonist who's a translator, but I really think of them as cozies, or on the
Yeah.
cozy side, and I've had some real arguments about that. What's your thought?
Well, Dean James writes Miranda James, The Cat in the Stacks. I mean, he writes a male writer and a male character. His,
Right,
his his librarian is
right.
Charlie is a male. So that works, and he falls in love with a woman. So that all works. And another one, E.J. Copperman writes a haunted guest house
Oh, right. Yeah, I've read those for
mystery.
ages. Yep.
Those are the only ones I can think of, but there are probably more because, you know, people write under different names and I haven't met them all.
Right. Well, I mean, I don't like to think of what we are calling a cozy as so formulaic that it doesn't allow for, variations. So when you're writing your books about the home repair, do you think of those? I'm sorry, I'm blanking out on the title for them.
Oh, the Fixer Upper
Yeah,
Mysteries.
the fixer-upper mysteries. Do you think of those as cozies?
Well, I do in the modern definition of cozy, an amateur sleuth with a sort of a niche profession. For her, it's a woman in a man's world, but it's a small town. It's quirky characters. It's all those things that make up a cozy. So I think of those as cozies, and the murder isn't on the page, except I usually have the murder on the page, and there's blood, but you know,
Well, it's not graphic violence. I mean, you're not
no,
right.
it's not
There's
at
no
all.
serial killer cozy that I'm aware of, nor would I
Right.
wish to read one. But you started out and you said amateur sleuth, which right there is not specifically,
No.
is gender neutral.
Mm-hmm.
In that you could have a guy who's a chocolatier, or or a famous baker, or a famous chef, or
Mm-hmm.
a not very good chef, or whatever you want to do. I think it's the profession more than it is the gender.
Yes.
And you're right. Generally, they're not urban.
Right.
Usually, it's a smaller community. I suppose that you could isolate a neighborhood in a big city. You
Mm-hmm.
could. I mean, Boston has distinct neighborhoods. New York has neighborhoods. Los Angeles has neighborhoods. So,
Mm-hmm.
San Francisco. I mean, in theory, you could set one in a smaller community in an urban setting
Right.
and give somebody a really interesting job. So I'm wondering if part of the reason there's this big push on gender is that more women, it's perceived that women read these books more than men. And I don't even know if that's necessarily true, but I have a gender neutral bookstore. So, I mean, I just noticed our last copy sold to a man in Texas. So, I mean, it's possible he bought it for his wife, but nonetheless, I never really think about, books slanted to either male or female readers because we have
Yeah.
such a fairly even distribution of them. But I'm not sure I doubt if that's the case normally.
When I first started the Bibliophile Mysteries, my first book, I had no idea what a cozy was. I didn't know it was actually considered a cozy until I saw the cover with a
Yeah,
cat. And I just thought, there's no cat in my book. Turns out there was, but I didn't remember.
right.
But yeah, it has been picked up by, I mean, a lot of women have gotten into it, and that's great. I'm all for that. But I think there are more men writing them than we might know about. But um, it's got all the elements of any other mystery, really, with an amateur sleuth. It's like Miss Marple,
Yeah.
from
No,
ages
I agree. I think Gideon Oliver, I loved Aaron Elkin's books. I
ago.
mean, he won the Edgar for Old Bones, which is still one of my very favorite mysteries. And, I mean, in a way, they were really kind of a cozy.
Hmm.
He was always examining dead bodies. So, it was hardly ever graphic. I mean, it was like usually the bones were already deflensed, so to speak. Well, they were, because he was
Hmm.
digging up anthropological stuff.
Right.
And Gideon had a very specific profession, didn't love violence, was not skilled in martial arts. Usually
Yeah.
wherever he went was in a relatively um, restricted setting.
Hmm.
And I thought they were fabulous. And the British call books like P.D. James cozies. And, those are
Wow.
often really graphic and all. And so
Yeah.
I think for the British, a cozy is fairly synonymous with amateur,
Yeah.
rather than a police procedural, um,
Hmm.
or a thriller. And I think in America, we have a narrower definition of it, which tends to have a certain, it's softer, I
Right.
guess would be the word.
Yeah, and I think you nailed it when you said the profession is the key, because the profession has to be the, I mean, if somebody is starting to write a cozy today, the first thing they need to think of is the profession, because that's the hook and that's the niche that it falls into. If they don't want to write a cozy, they can just do it, an amateur sleuth in a darker setting, in a darker reality, in a darker world. But for a cozy, that profession is key, I think. And that's why you could be a man or a woman.
Yeah, I think you can too. Well, let's talk about Brooklyn's profession, because you've obviously done a lot of work to work out what a book restorer does. And how she handles books and the tools of her trade. And also, why did you decide to make Brooklyn a book restorer? And then let's talk about how you boned up on book restoring so you could write authentically.
Well, I used to take little book arts classes, and that was a favorite thing of mine. And I do have a friend back in the day who was a master bookbinder, and so he showed me a lot of stuff. But then I started taking classes. I was never going to be a bookbinder myself, unfortunately, but I took a lot of classes, and the idea sort of came to me because of this old friend of mine who was, just so skilled. And he would come and visit us for a weekend and stay at our house. And then he would take one of my books and send it back a month later, and it was just beautifully bound in, soft leather and all that stuff. So that was kind of the genesis of the character. And then originally I wanted her to be going to New York for a book auction, or going to Lyon, where the famous book binding library is. And I tried moving her to the Edinburgh Book Festival in book two, and I realized writing that book that I needed her whole family and all her friends to be there, because that's another part of what a cozy is that the characters, the secondary characters that make up the little community that she lives in, and make up the interactions and suspects and all that kind of stuff. So I had to get her mother and father there, a girlfriend, and then Derek had to be there. But anyway, that stopped after I went to Edinburgh because I didn't want to drag her whole family and all of her friends along on all these adventures. So she has a bookbinding studio in San Francisco, which is not a cozy town. Um, but what did I know when I first started? But she does have a small town in Sonoma County, small town winery. It's all the things that I loved. It took me so long to publish a book that when I finally did, I put every aspect of my life and what I love into the books, which is the wine country and San Francisco, where I have family, and you know.
No, I do. It really comes across in the books how much you love it. Dharma being the small town where Brooklyn and Derek are building their dream house, and her parents
Mm.
live there. And it gets you out of the city into this smaller community. In this book, you actually do take a trip back to Scotland, but not it's not the whole book, so she doesn't have to drag everybody with her. But and you have a lot of fun. I mean, in this book particularly, you have this sort of constant tongue-in-cheek sort of thing about, it's always about the book. Brooklyn, as is unlikely, keeps stumbling into murders and tumbling over bodies and so forth. But, everybody kind of laughs in the book and says, well, it's always about a book. And in fact, it is always about a book. You've done cookbooks, you've got, here we've got Rebecca, you've had a lot of fun with picking books. So I guess a really good question would be, do you think about a book and then work out a plot to go with it? Or do you think of a story and then you go hunting for a book that can bring Brooklyn into the story?
When I plot a book, I always start with the book, and I find the book that is on my mind at that time, and then I build the plot around it. Well, the book kind of provides the catalyst for the mystery and the murder and everything else, and I try to have some parallels run through my book that coincide with the book that I'm working on. So Rebecca is kind of, it's not as involved as some of my other books have been. The connection with Rebecca is the Gothic novels that the women share that love of. But I had a book. My third book was The Lies That Bind, and the book that they were celebrating, they had a book festival, and it was Oliver Twist. And this book involved a band of book thieves. And as in Oliver, they have a little band of, raggedy boys that are thieves. So, and then there was a ringleader. And what I'm saying is my books I try to have some parallels with the book that I'm concentrating on.
So do you reread whatever the book it is before you get underway so that you'll be familiar with it?
I try to. Sometimes I always buy the book and I have it, and sometimes I use my Cliff Notes because most of the books that I've picked I have read in the past.
Right.
And so when I don't have time to actually sit down and read it, I'll thumb through it. I'll look at Cliff Notes, which is a terrible thing to admit, but that's what I do sometimes. And also I'll listen to the book on tape because then I can soak it in that way.
Sure.
But I have all the books that I've featured here in my bookshelf over there. So.
Well, I didn't think that you were just picking books at random out of the blue. I mean, you have to feel some emotional connection with. So, one of the great things we all learned from John Dunning in Book to Die and the subsequent books is how valuable books can be. And, for Brooklyn, for people to solicit her services, you wouldn't normally do it for just an ordinary book. I mean, you could if it had sentimental value or you were looking to make a great gift or something. But in general, if she's going to be hired, because she can't work cheaply, if she's going to be hired to do a restoration project or something, it's going to be a book of value. Now, it might not always be monetary value. It could be that there's some kind of other value that the people who want it or who are operating because of it attached to it. So, you know, and you're right, there are book fairs and, you know, book events all over the place. Actually, there's a very large percentage of cozy mysteries that are bookish. They're either
Yes.
about librarians or, you know, people who own bookstores or,
Mm-hmm.
but I didn't think there's anybody else who's in book restoring. Does this, I think you've got that one nailed down.
I think I do. When I first came up with the idea, I Googled bookbinder series because, you know, I had to make it original and make it my own. But I the, there is not a bookbinder that I know of.
I didn't think so either. One of the other things that's attractive about old books is that in the original or possibly the rebinding process, because some old books have had more than one person working on them, they
Mm-hmm.
often included material like to pad the boards before they put the leather over them and stuff. I've been through, you know, I was the librarian at the Library of Congress, so I've been through bookbinding school, and and
Wow.
there's some actually good videos about how you go about, you know, it's quite complicated to, you know, sew the, you know, I mean, you get the pages, then you have to sew the signatures together, and then you have to do
Mm-hmm.
all this great stuff. And there are a lot of different schools about how to do it, you know,
Mm-hmm.
what kind of covers, whether there's embossing, what the spine looks like, you know, how you sew it together, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, over the years, there have been some really interesting finds when books are taken apart and the leather or whatever it might be comes off. Sometimes I think I'm trying to remember, there have been some interesting literary fragments that have been recovered
Mm-hmm.
because the binder would have taken, you know, some what looked like scrap paper
Right.
and, you know, used it to stuff things. And then, and often people hide things in books. You know, there are a lot of mysteries where, in point of fact, somebody has hidden something inside a book, inside a library, you know, figuring it's better than a safe
Mm-hmm.
or, um, or a code in a book.
Right.
And books can become really, before computers, books were really an excellent code device.
Mm-hmm.
Lots
Yeah.
of different.
Yeah. This book, the Rebecca in my book is used as a to send some messages back and forth.
So there's some fun code cracking stuff
Mm-hmm.
that goes on that you must have enjoyed. Code cracking always makes my head ache. I mean, I'm just not good at that kind of thing. And, you know, there are books where you go through the whole explanation of what the code is and how the rest of it goes. And I tend to glaze over when when I get to that because I just want to get the answer. Just
Right.
me, you know, my
Yes.
mind just doesn't work. I would never have prospered at Bletchley Park. I mean, I just a complete
I
dud.
wouldn't either. I have my cookbook conspiracy. The book in that book is I made up. It was a cookbook from the American Revolutionary War, and the woman that wrote it was a housekeeper, and it was used to pass information back and forth about the war, the Revolutionary War. So that was very fun. But those codes were a lot more elaborate than the Rebecca. I mean, there's different kinds of coding, and the one in Rebecca was just, well, spoiler alert, that's marking off letters, you know, and making a sentence. And then, you
Don't
know,
go any further. But no, I like the way you did it. I thought it was extremely well done. There have been some other. I think one of them might even be real life about paper and codes. And one of them, a Spanish author, wrote a really interesting book about a dressmaker in Lisbon who passed information to the British by putting code into the dress patterns,
oh my gosh,
which I think, you know, is a
that's
variation
fabulous.
on a
Yeah.
theme.
Mm-hmm.
And it's certainly also been true in like pages of music, you know, where the notes. I
Uh-huh.
mean, you know, so they're written documents or paper in paper and ink, however you want to
Yeah.
look at it, can
Yeah.
be used in various ways. I really love the dress pattern one. I just thought that was so cool.
That's fascinating.
It really was.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah. The other, I'm trying to think of all the different associations we have with books. I mean, you can have a diary, for example, that can be a really hot ticket because of revelations inside it. Isn't the book
Right.
itself,
Mm-hmm.
but the content. Um, you can, I mean, people used to really write, you
Yeah.
know, diaries and personal memoirs and
Yes.
commonplace books and notebooks and all kinds of things, which can reveal a lot. So you can easily build a plot around a family secret that,
Right.
some book may blow apart.
Yeah.
Um,
The first book I wrote was had a secret inside the book, and it was a really devastating family secret that people were willing to kill for.
yeah, well, yes, the other thing is you have to make the stakes high enough. If you're going to have a murder, it can't be, really, it doesn't sit well if it's a trivial motive. So that would be the other thing that must test you a bit, is trying to come up with something that's high stakes enough to cause somebody to kill somebody. Do you find that's difficult?
Um, I I don't really. I usually come up with odd things. I mean, there's so many aspects of bookbinding and letterpress and paper making. One of my books is about a paper maker, and he was a rock star paper maker. He would come to book arts classes, and there would be groupies, um, and the story isn't about his paper making so much as it is about his relationship early on with Brooklyn and another woman. And so it's always about the book, but the murder and the mystery, I don't know. It's how it comes into my head, but I just enjoy it.
Well,
It
it
makes me
works.
crazy.
So one of the nice things about Little Black Book is that the book that arrives at the door is addressed to Derek rather
Mm-hmm.
than Brooklyn. So right away you figure that it has to be tied to the UK,
Right,
and possibly tied to Derek's earlier career.
right.
And fortunately, he's kept in touch with many of his former colleagues, so he has
Yeah.
this kind of network. But let's talk a little bit about the local comp in San Francisco, because she is really cool. Have you had fun inventing her and writing her?
Inspector Lee. Yes, I love her. She is so tough, and and Brooklyn tries to be friends with her each time, and then they won't see each other for a month or two or three, and then they see each other on a murder scene, and it's kind of like, of all the gin joints, once again you are on my murder scene. So, but I don't show them as good friends when it's in the book, but they have a relationship um, above and beyond, what I'm writing. They have a whole relationship in my head. Of course, it's all in my head. Got a bunch of crazy people running around my head, but um, Brooklyn has fixed books for her mother. And the way that Brooklyn kind of eases into Inspector Lee's world is actually through her mother, because she brought back a book from Paris in the book Supremacy, and she fixed it up and gave it to Inspector Lee for her mother. And before she left for Paris, Inspector Lee, she asked if she wanted something to be brought back from Paris, and Inspector Lee said, "Yeah, as long as it's not one of those stupid keychains with the Eiffel Tower on it." So of course Brooklyn brings her back a keychain with the Eiffel Tower on it, but she also brings back this beautiful little Chinese herbal book, because her mother is, you know, Chinese, and Inspector Lee is first generation Chinese American, and she's this gorgeous woman with long black hair, and she dresses just you know,
Just a very
Burberry
cool coat in
coats
this
and
book.
just,
I love the coat that you've given her,
yeah,
which I
gorgeous
would never
shoes.
wear in Phoenix because it's too hot, but it's obviously perfect for San Francisco.
Yeah. Well, I'm in the desert too, so it's a vicarious thrill when I write her books, her stories.
And what about the cupcake baking neighbor who has superior martial arts skills?
Okay, that's another one I love. And she is Alex Monroe down the hall. And she is a high-powered businesswoman, sorry. She runs her own company and she comes home. She doesn't have any girlfriends because everybody she knows in her business are too uptight and high powered. So when she comes home, she relaxes by baking cupcakes, and she is a master cupcake baker. And she and when she meets Brooklyn, they hit it off immediately, and Alex is very protective of Brooklyn. And she's trying to teach her some martial arts moves because Brooklyn has been, caught getting hurt. So Alex takes her to her dojo and teaches her the moves. But when Brooklyn introduces Alex to Derek, it's a few books back, the two of them have this silent realization and moment, and Brooklyn's like, what's going on here? Because Alex was an operative as well. Derek was an MI6. So the two of them kind of like, are you going to hurt her? Are you going to hurt her? Because Brooklyn also had a girlfriend that she took to Dharma and she tried to kill her family. So she isn't always making the best choices of her friends. So Derek was very protective when he first met Alex, and Alex was very protective because she clicked with Brooklyn immediately. So anyway, Alex is a great character for me, and Alex finally got together with Gabriel, who was the second guy who was going to be back and forth between Derek and Gabriel, as we always try to start the little threesomes in these books. Derek wasn't having any of it. Derek wouldn't let me get involved with Gabriel at all. And my editor at the time said, you're going to have to find the best woman in the world for Gabriel, because she was in love. My editor was madly in love with Gabriel, so I had to find the perfect woman. I tried to get a masseuse, this little girl, at a party, and my editor said, that is not going to happen. Forget it. But finally, with Alex and Gabriel kind of clicked, and it's all good with everybody.
So you're running kind of a marriage bureau here for our fictional characters. I love that. That's really fun. I want to know if the lemon meringue cupcakes that Alex bakes and brings over, is that your own recipe? I'm very fond of lemon curd, so I thought it was a real killer cupcake.
That was my own recipe. I might have been channeling Jen McKinley,
Yes.
but that was my own recipe for that one.
I was trying to work out the meringue frosting. I'm not at all sure that I would like meringue frosting on a cupcake, but maybe it's delicious. But I love lemon meringue pie. So
I do too. But the meringue, the meringue on the cupcake isn't as meringue as the lemon meringue pie.
okay.
It's a little softer, you know.
So are you now at the point where every book you can come up with a new batch of cupcakes, 2 or 3?
I never did recipes. That's another thing with cozies. They have recipes.
Many of them do, yes.
I didn't have a recipe until the Cookbook Conspiracy, which was my 7th book. And after that, I didn't always have recipes, but now I do. The last 5 or 6 books have had recipes. This book, Rebecca.
I can look. Since I
Little
have
black
right
book.
here. You do, definitely. You have cockaliki soup, which is a Scottish soup, and made with chicken and various things, which is delicious. You have coconut curry lobster bisque, which sounds fabulous, and Dharma lentil soup, hot and sour soup. You're really into soup in this book.
Well, these are all soup recipes from the four places that she was. So she was in San Francisco. One is wine country. It's a lentil soup. I think it's sort of
Yeah,
new age kind of soup.
I love lentil.
One and one is Scottish, and the fourth one was something that they had on the plane, on the jet, the private jet that they all take to Scotland. And then the last recipe in there is cheesy scones,
Yep.
which are just delicious, and they go with everything. So I kind of tied it all together with the scones.
Very nice. Now, when you do this, do you have? I've had these discussions with Joanne Fluke and all, who half her books are recipes. So
Right.
she has to be really serious about it. Are these recipes that you test out in your own kitchen so you're sure that they're actually going to work?
I test out them, and I also have an assistant, a virtual assistant, who loves to cook and bake, and so she will test them as well. And usually, when she tests them, we know that they're going to work. If
Ah,
I test them, there's you know, that doesn't always work, but I love the idea of it, and so she improves it and makes it work.
right. Well, I do think that readers often expect some sort of a bonus in a cozy.
Hmm.
Doesn't always have to be a recipe, although frequently it is, but usually it'll be something connected with the expertise, the special profession of the sleuth. And I always I think that's good because I think it caters to people who read mystery are always interested in learning things.
Hmm.
So I think that a lot of people bond, I think, to these books because of the profession, coming full circle back to where I was, because they're interested in what that is. And if you remember years ago, Berkeley threw out, I mean, you had the candle making cozy, you had the gourd sculpting
Gourd.
cozy, and all.
Yep.
Some of them I thought were, I mean, I'm not saying there aren't people interested in that, but I thought that they went really niche,
Yeah.
and,
Way down.
um, possibly overdoing it. But it's hard to go wrong with recipes or things about books, or there are
Yeah.
quite a few that have to do with knitting,
Oh,
and
yes.
crocheting, and so you can always have patterns, and
Right.
tips on that. You can also have horticultural, flower arranging or tips on
Mhm.
growing flowers. Jane Cleland's books I love because she always has cool antiques,
Yeah.
so you get to learn really interesting things from Josie Prescott about
Hmm.
whatever antiques are being featured. So
Yes.
I do think there's a certain pressure on authors, to have expertise or at least present in an informed way, in what feels like an authentic way,
Hmm.
whatever the professional niche and skills might happen to be.
Yeah. In one of my earlier books, I had a bookbinding glossary that a lot of people were interested in because she uses a lot of the terms and, just kind of, as you say, learning something new. And I also, I haven't put it in a book yet, but I've got a, a seminar that I've done on just keeping books healthy on a shelf, or how to tell when a rare book, an expensive book, has been is fraudulent, because there's some of that going around too. So that kind of information, but these days it's mostly recipes.
Well, you have a good point there, which is, you can forge paintings
Hmm.
and so forth, but you can also have fake rare books. And
Yeah.
provenance is a really important thing, the whole chain of
Yes.
ownership, trying to establish whether something is a fake or something is real,
Hmm.
because there can be some really, really um, pricey books in the world. There's a book coming out called The Personal Librarian next week, which is about J.P. Morgan's
Oh yeah.
librarian, Belle DaCosta Green,
Yeah.
who, very interestingly, in the Gilded Age, is a woman who was put into a position what generally would have been occupied by men, And not only was that interesting, but she was also Black, although she told everybody she was Portuguese, and that's why she was dark. But she was, in fact, an Afro-American woman, which I think is remarkable. But the real thing about her was her curatorial and bibliographic skills, which also involved, acquisition and maintenance and all the rest. If you go to the Morgan Library, they used to have a really cool film about her and about his collection. It's one of the really great private libraries, the Morgan Library Museum in New York. It's at 36th and Madison. And I try to go every time I'm in New York, and they do wonderful special exhibitions. And it's not always just books, it can be musical manuscripts. I mean, they have some original Mozart and Beethoven manuscripts. The thing that knocks you out about the Mozart manuscripts is they are absolutely perfect. He was able to write a first draft symphony and not go back and alter it. He obviously heard the whole thing in his head in such a way that he could just put it down, which I thought was just, I don't know.
Yeah.
He's the only person, in all of history, I think, if I could go back and, he died too soon. If I had the power to bring one person back, just one, I would pick Wolfgang. He was just hitting his stride when he died. Right. And I think about all of the music that he might yet have created, and it just stabs me,
Tragic, right.
Listen to the Magic Flute and you think, oh my God, it's just on the cusp, of doing something truly astonishing. Well, he did do astonishing things, but with more to go. But anyway, I digress. But I've always loved the manuscripts that the Morgan, can point out things like that to you. It's not only the manuscript that's valuable, but what it says to you about the person who created it and what their skill set was. So, you could actually have a bound, an opera score or, a musical thing at some point, if because they are bound. That might be an interesting thing for Brooklyn to get into sometime. I'm happy to give you plot ideas. You write them, I think them up, it'll all be good.
But the J.P. Morgan Library is gorgeous. I love going there. It's beautiful. So
it really is. And not only that, but the house is such a perfect remnant of a Gilded Age mansion, not on Fifth Avenue, but just, one street over. Right. And I have to say, I think a lot more of J.P. Morgan that he hired Belda Costa Green. Yeah. I mean, he obviously saw something in her that, made him kind of break tradition. And yeah. So Patrick, you want to pop in and join us? Do we have any questions from the audience, or you want to make comments about rare books here?
Yeah, we do have some nice comments. A lot of people watching, and I think Janelle speaks for all of us when she says, "I wish I had a neighbor who brought me cupcakes."
Especially lemon meringue, I know.
Yeah. No, a lot of people are just saying, how much they love learning things when they read your books, and in fact, someone in the comments here just said that, Deborah, she says, I repaired a book using techniques from Brooklyn. How cool is that?
That's great.
Yeah.
I love it.
Let's see here. Okay, and Maza, forgive me if I mispronounced that, has a really nice comment. She says, Kate, you're my favorite author. Thank you for your writing. Your books have helped me through some really dark times. That's nice.
That's really nice.
Yeah. Let's see here. Oh, Carol asks, are you happy with the Hallmark movies of your Fixer Upper series?
Yes, I love them. They changed so much about the books, but that's to be expected because they're doing an hour and a half video, visual thing. So I was thrilled. I got comments on my Facebook page about my character, Shannon, is a redhead. She has curly red hair. And so they were angry that Jewel was picked to play the character, and it's like, that is just the least of my problems, really. They changed her name. They did all sorts of things. The first scene in the first movie, a boat blows up. that never happened in my books, but it was visual. It was wonderful, and it killed off one of the, people that I had to have killed off. So I thought they did a lovely job for a Hallmark movie. The Hallmark movies are, they appeal to a certain, population, and they're fun. They're light and fun, and they did a good job as far as I'm concerned.
And you still have the books. That's the important thing to remember.
That's right. They
Now,
say, yeah,
whatever the movie or the TV adaptation is, doesn't change the book.
right. If anyone said, yo, they ruined your book, well, they didn't. My book is right here. It's not.
Right.
So yeah, that's
Still a redhead in the book, I mean,
right.
it's all fine. Yeah.
Right.
Let's see. Diane asked. She says, Kate, do you decide on the old book that is going to be in the story, or do you have the storyline first?
No, I pick the book out first, and the plot revolves around that book. I mean, it's almost like I can't really start plotting a book until I have, or my book, until I have the book that she's working on, because that's going to be the impetus to go forward and, kill people.
Have you done anything in any of your books? That tradition of there's rare books where they have some elaborately painted scene on the page edges themselves. There's
Isn't
that
that
whole,
amazing?
yeah,
It's called four-edge painting.
yes,
So it goes. They've opened the book. They've kind of done this. They've kind of pushed it forward, and they paint a picture, and it's very elaborate. And then when you close it, you don't see it.
right.
And it's so remarkable to me that those are hand painted. They didn't reproduce those, and that's one book that an artist sat and did that, and it's just remarkable. It's just
Has that featured into any of your plots yet?
I've had them in the book, but it hasn't been a key part of it hasn't been part of the real book that she's working on. But she
Right.
has worked with those kinds of books.
Cool.
And if you go, if you look at medieval manuscripts, not only are they painted, but very often they, there's actual gold and so forth.
Right.
You find it in psalters and religious books, because that's mostly what they were, books of hours and so forth, because they were so unbelievably expensive. When they were commissioned, most of the time they were of a religious nature. But then you got engravings. There's some wonderful books that are full of woodcuts or engravings. But really, it's not so much the text of the book as the art that makes them valuable.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a whole.
There's so many opportunities to hide little things, little messages, a previous restorer putting their mark somewhere. I don't know. It's endlessly fascinating, isn't it?
Yes, I think so.
So Sharon asks, she says, what is Kate's writing process, please?
Ah,
I was going to try to spare you that question, but here it is.
I work with a plot group. My girls, Paige Shelton and Jen McKinley, the three of us get together maybe twice a year. We used to get together at the Valley Ho in Phoenix, but now we Zoom together and we come with an idea. I usually have 6 or 7 pages outlined, and then we brainstorm and we come up with an opening or a scene or a new character that might add something to it, or a certain suspect that would be better than this suspect. So I work with the group, and then I write a long synopsis, and then I start writing the book, and then I get completely lost and freak out, and I panic and I cry, and then I remember that I had a synopsis and get back into the book. So that's my process. It's horrifying.
It's really messy, isn't it?
It's very messy, but it works. In the end, it all gets together.
Do you shoot for a certain number of words a day, or do you spend a certain amount of time behind the computer?
Yes, I actually am organized in that way. I try to write a couple thousand books, a couple thousand words a day, and I keep track of it on a calendar, and I'm very good about that. But the writing itself is just like it's great. You know, it's fun and crazy. That's my process. It's just I write down the words every day, and I figure out how many words I have to write per day to get to where my deadline hits. So if I have 3 months, then I break it down into, daily work.
So you're still doing 2 books a year?
Yes, I'm still doing 2 books a year, one, for each series. And sometimes it just seems like too much, but I get it done. I used to write 4 books a year, so it's crazy.
Well,
Seems
you do
like
have
there's a, I was just going to say, it seems like there could be a real obvious through line between both series, you know, fixing up and restoring old books, old
Mhm.
homes and old books. And there's a
Yes.
lot of, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you have to be really organized to write 2 books a year. You don't have, the discretionary time that
Right.
a longer deadline would allow.
Yeah.
So makes good sense. I'm glad you mentioned Jen because we are actually going to do a live event with Jen on August 10th
Yay.
for her romantic book. And in fact, we're going back to more live events this fall. So you should be able to come back and meet at the Valley Home.
Wouldn't that be great? I'd love to do that.
Well, they're back
Fun.
open again,
Yeah.
so I think that will be really fun to get
Very
back.
fun.
Zoom is okay, but it's not quite the same as
Right.
sitting in the bar with a drink and hashing over ideas.
That's what makes it. That's the key to the whole plotting session.
I got a couple more that have just come in right before we sort of close. Carol asks, who is your favorite character besides Brooklyn and Shannon?
Oh well, there. I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, but Derek is my version of James Bond, and you can pick your favorite James Bond, and that is Derek Stone. And I loved him from the very beginning. Just he just clicked for me. But I also love her mom, and these are real people in my head. I talk about them like they're my family. Um, I just I don't know. I like them all, but Derek would be the one that I,
Like picking a favorite child, right?
right,
Each
right,
parent probably really has one. They just won't admit it.
right. They can't talk about it.
Right. Okay, Wendy asks, will the characters in your different series, ever meet?
Well, I've thought about that, and they could, there could be a way to make that happen. But it's funny. Speaking of Jen again, she has a library lovers mysteries, and I have the bookbinder mysteries, and we thought that our 2 characters could meet up at the Library of Congress and do a novella or something someday, maybe. But
Wonderful. I can be your consultant.
yes, perfect.
We can all drink at the Valley Home and talk about it. No, I think that's a great idea. As I mentioned earlier, I'm always surprised at well, not surprised. I should do a count of how many books in the cozy field are about books, whether librarians or whatever. I mean,
Hmm.
it's it's sort of a natural fit if you think
I'm
about
glad you held up the book because there was a question that I lost track of earlier where somebody was saying, your covers are so great. Do you have a lot of input into them?
Um, I sort of do. I send pictures and photos, and they always want to see what the cat looks like. And I send a picture of a cat that I'm having fun with at that time. That castle, I sent a picture of the castle on Loch Ness. Um, and I find for this cover, I found a picture of this old bench, similar to this bench, and the little dagger, and the Rebecca is the actual British first edition. That's what it looks like.
It's black, isn't it? It
Black.
doesn't, yeah, it's a very plain
Yeah.
presentation.
So I just, and strangely enough, I wanted a helicopter in here. So, so I just send pictures of things and they kind of put it together. It's,
Right, there's the helicopter. Yeah, it's
yeah.
not all that easy to see it. And there's Rebecca, the
Mhm.
black cover,
And I,
which is great because Brooklyn should be able to restore the Rebecca in the book
yeah,
in good condition because it's not a lot of artwork and so forth. You just need
right.
to have a great black binding again, right?
Uh-huh. Right. Yeah. So I do that, and then we come up with a title, and that's a whole other issue. But
Yeah,
that's
there were
a,
some people asking questions about that. Were they your titles usually, or is it the publisher?
it's half and half. It's the cozy market likes punny titles, and I can do that better in the fixer-upper mysteries. Um, like the next one coming out next later in this year is Absence of Mallets,
Oh,
and you know, premeditated mortar and things like that. That's more fun. The book ones are more about books, so I have to find clever titles that have to do with books, like One Book in the Grave, or Books of a Feather, or things like that. The Once Upon a Spine. I come up with them. My assistant comes up with them. She's very punny. She's insanely punny, much more punny than I am. And then my agent gets into the act and she comes up with some, and my editor every once in a while has a title idea. So we kind of, it's a big group.
Can you have one called something about publish and perish or something like that?
I think that's Caitlin Dunnett,
Is it?
which
Sorry.
I don't know. I don't know. She has the, no, that's not hers. She has a new series, relatively new, and it looks like a bookshelf with like 3 or 4 books, and it's like crime and punctuation, and they're
Right.
they're they're punny.
You had Homicide in hardcover, right? That's a
Yeah,
great title. Yeah.
yeah. Edited to death. I think I ran across one coming out by, gosh, I can't remember who, but sometimes there's grammar in it and so forth. Jen has a real gift, or her somehow or other, her titles are often very funny, and
yes.
they're very funny.
We When she does the libraries, we fight over titles because they both are bookish, and
Right.
I'll come up with one, and I I said, "Wait till you hear my new title." And we go back and forth and fight over titles because they're bookish. She can go more with the library and do or die, that sort of thing with the library issue, but we have a good time with those
Books
titles.
can be deceiving and
Yeah. Oh
right.
yeah, I killed for that one. That's
Does it.
Premeditated
Jen's.
mortar is great. I love that.
Yeah.
Premeditated. That's fantastic.
And you can do
Do
a
you have a
lot.
long list of them? Are you always kind of coming up with ideas, or do your fans send in pun ideas?
Once in a great while, a reader will send something in. But yes, I have a list. Oh my God, it must be 10 pages by now. But yeah, I'll come up with 4 or 5 at a time, and I'll put it in the document, and yeah, it's long.
Anything else, Patrick?
Well, a lot of people are saying, wow, it would be great to have, Kate and Jen do a book together, or a novella, or Kate and Paige do a book together. Or here's somebody who says a meetup with Jen's librarian in Brooklyn would be very interesting.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
they could meet at Page's Scottish Bookshop in Edinburgh. So
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
you guys could do some sort of a collaborative novel. That would be a lot
Hmm.
of fun.
That would be very fun. We did talk about having a plot group in Scotland next year.
Oh, all right then. Better than the Valley Ho,
Hmm. Well, yeah, Castle or the Valley Ho. Valley Ho is probably more fun.
huh? Well, I think the Scotland thing could be fun. Paige is obviously having a very good time with her Scottish bookshop series.
Oh, it's
And,
it's fun.
looking for of course she's looking a lot at Scottish authors, which makes perfectly good sense if you have a
Yes.
bookshop in Edinburgh. But
Right.
fortunately, the Scots wrote lots of books. There's a very wide field of Scottish authors that she can
Yeah.
tap into, modern and older. So I think that's great.
Right.
Patrick, anything else?
I think that's about it.
All right. Well, it's really been a pleasure, Kate, as always, to talk to you.
Thank
Every
you.
once in a while, it's fun to do one just us because oftentimes, you're a group. So maybe when the Fixer Upper comes up, we can do a group thing. Which
I love it. Love
anyway, here's this lovely book, Little Black Book. And if you're a fan of Rebecca, or you just, fan of books in general, if you want to go to wine country, if you want to go to Scotland, this is your book. Right. So thank you for watching. There will be a podcast available in the next couple of days, and recommend to your friends who might have missed this that the video will be up and they can watch it forever. Your actual publication date is Tuesday, right, Kate?
Yes.
Right. So you'll be able to find Little Black Book at the Poison Pen or other bookstore of your choice on Tuesday. So it'll be perfect for 4th of July reading. Well done,
Right.
Kate.
Thank you.
Right. So good night, dear. Nice to see you.
Everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Good to see you all.
Bye.
Bye.
Hello. We hope you're enjoying our programs and podcasts with authors. We'd like to expand them, and your help would be appreciated. Please make a donation at poisonedpenfoundation.org. 100% of the proceeds will go to help connect authors with readers in this difficult time. Thank you.